The village of Ashburn nestled in the shadow of a thick, ancient forest. The locals rarely ventured into the woods, and when they did, it was always in daylight. There were old stories about children who disappeared in those dark trees, never to be seen again. But over time, those stories had faded into whispers, lost to the wind. It began one autumn evening when a thick fog rolled in from the woods, enveloping the village like a suffocating blanket. That night, the wind carried strange sounds, howls that weren't quite animal but also not entirely human. No one could say what they were, but they were enough to send a chill down the spine of every villager. Then came the first sighting. Young Amelia, no older than 8, went missing while playing near the edge of the forest. Her father, a burly woodsman named Gareth, led the search. The village searched for hours but found nothing. As the sun began to set, they prepared to return, but Gareth wouldn't leave. He plunged deeper into the woods alone, refusing to give up. It was well past midnight when he found her, or what he thought was her. Amelia stood in a small clearing, pale and silent. She didn't speak, didn't cry, she only watched him with wide, dark eyes. Something was different about her, something Gareth couldn't explain. Her skin was colder than the fog around them, and her movements were stiff, almost unnatural. But she was his daughter. He took her home, relieved but unsettled. For the next few days, Amelia was distant. She didn't laugh, didn't play, didn't even speak much. She spent most of her time staring out the window toward the forest. Her mother, Evelyn, noticed strange scratches on Amelia's arms and legs, as if she had crawled through the underbrush. When questioned, Amelia only said one thing: **, the children of the woods. **, more children began to disappear. Each time, they returned within a day or two, unharmed but changed. They became quieter, their gazes darker, their skin paler. They spoke of strange games played with shadowy figures deep within the forest, of songs whispered on the wind, and of the others, the ones who never came back. Fear gripped Ashburn. No one allowed their children near the woods anymore. But it was too late. The fog came more frequently now, rolling through the streets at night, bringing with it those eerie howls. The children were no longer themselves. They gathered at night, in secret, whispering to one another in voices too low for their parents to hear. Their laughter, once innocent, had taken on a cruel edge, and they seemed drawn to the forest, as if something in the darkness was calling them. It was old Mrs. Havers, the village healer, who spoke the truth everyone feared. "They're not just lost," she said, her voice trembling. "The forest has taken them. It's in their blood now." One night, Gareth, determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, followed Amelia into the woods. She moved swiftly, her small figure darting through the trees as if she belonged there. Deeper and deeper she went, until they reached a hidden grove bathed in silver moonlight. There, Gareth saw them, the children of the woods. Dozens of them, all with the same pale skin and dark eyes, all moving with a strange grace. And in the center of the grove stood a massive figure, a creature with the body of a man but the head of a wolf, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The children gathered around the creature, their small hands reaching out to touch its fur. It bent down, its long snout brushing against each child's forehead, as if claiming them. The creature's eyes fell on Gareth, and in that moment, he understood. This was no ordinary werewolf. It was something older, something that had lived in the woods for centuries, waiting for its time to come again. And now, through the children, it was spreading its curse. Gareth stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to warn the village. He had to stop this before it was too late. But as he turned to flee, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Daddy!" He froze. Amelia stood there, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "Come with us," she whispered. "The children of the woods are waiting." Gareth backed away slowly, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The fog thickened around him, and he felt something brush against his small hands, cold and insistent. He broke into a run, the sounds of laughter and howling echoing in his ears. When he returned to the village, no one believed his story. But the children, they knew, and they watched him with those dark, knowing eyes. The fog never truly left Ashburn, and neither did the children of the woods. They were always there, waiting, growing stronger with each passing night. And deep in the forest, the werewolf watched, biding its time, knowing that soon the village would belong to it. But the worst part was that Gareth could feel it deep in his blood. The curse was taking root. He wasn't just losing his daughter, he was becoming one of them. The next full moon was only days away. The days leading up to the next full moon were a blur of dread for Gareth. He could feel the change stirring inside him and itch beneath his skin, a restless energy crawling through his bones. Each night, he lay in bed, fighting the urge to slip into the woods, to answer the silent call that seemed to beckon him deeper into darkness. The children were always near. He could feel their eyes on him whenever he ventured outside, their gaze cold and calculating. And Amelia, she was the worst. She never left the house anymore, preferring to stay in her room with the curtains drawn, sitting in silence for hours. Occasionally, Gareth would hear her talking to someone, her voice low and conspiratorial, but when he checked on her, there was never anyone there. One night, Gareth couldn't sleep. He stared out his window, looking towards the woods that loomed over the village like a dark, ancient sentinel. The fog, always present now, swirled lazily through the streets. And then he saw her Amelia, standing in the garden, her pale figure barely visible in the moonlight. She was not alone. Two other children stood beside her, their hands clasped together. They whispered to one another in strange, guttural voices that sent shivers down Gareth's spine. He couldn't make out their words, but their tone was urgent, almost hungry. Amelia glanced towards the woods, her eyes gleaming unnaturally in the dark. Gareth's heart hammered in his chest as he watched her take a step towards the trees. He knew, deep down, that if she went into the forest this time, she would never come back. Not as his daughter, not as the girl he once knew. Without thinking, he bolted outside, calling her name. Amelia turned slowly, her expression calm, as if she had been expecting him. The other children retreated into the shadows, their eyes never leaving him. "Daddy," Amelia said, her voice soft. "It's almost time." "Time for what?" Gareth asked, his throat tight with fear. "For you to come with us," she replied. "You're changing, too. The forest wants you." Gareth shook his head, trying to suppress the panic rising in his chest. "No, Amelia, we're going to stop this. We're going to end whatever curse is inside of you. Inside of me." Amelia tilted her head, her lips curling into a small, knowing smile. "You can't stop it. It's older than you. Older than any of us." She took another step toward the forest, her small hand reaching out toward him. "Come, Daddy. You'll see. The Wolf is waiting. He says you're ready." Gareth recoiled, fighting the pull he felt in his own blood. He knew she was right. The transformation had already begun, slow and insidious. His dreams were filled with running under the moon, his hands turning to claws, his skin bristling with fur. And each morning, when he awoke, there was dirt beneath his fingernails. But he couldn't give in. Not yet. He grabbed Amelia's wrist, his grip firm but gentle. "We're leaving, Amelia. You and me. We're getting out of this cursed village." For the first time in weeks, something flickered in Amelia's eyes, an emotion that wasn't the eerie detachment she had adopted since her return from the woods, but it passed as quickly as it came. She pulled her hand from his grasp. "You can't leave," she whispered. "The forest won't let you." Before Gareth could respond, a low growl rumbled through the trees. His blood turned to ice as the sound reverberated in the air, deep and primal. The children scattered into the shadows, their laughter echoing eerily. Amelia took a step back towards the woods. "It's too late, Daddy." And then she was gone, vanishing into the mist like a ghost. Gareth stood frozen, listening to the whispers of the forest around him, feeling the weight of the curse growing heavier with each passing second. He knew he couldn't stay in Ashburn, but where could he go that the forest wouldn't follow? Where could he escape the call of the Wolf? That night, he packed a small bag and left a note for Evelyn. He couldn't bring himself to say goodbye in person, it would be too painful. He knew she would never understand what had happened to their daughter, to him. But maybe, if he was far enough away, he could resist the change. Maybe he could find help. As he made his way out of the village, the fog seemed to part for him. almost as if the forest was watching him leave, amused by his desperate attempt to escape. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The moon was full by the time he reached the old road leading away from Ashburn. His breath came in sharp gasps, and his skin prickled with the familiar sensation of the change trying to take hold. He gritted his teeth and forced himself onward, determined to outrun it. But then he heard it. Footsteps small, quick, and too many to count following him. He turned slowly, dreading what he knew he would see. The children were there, standing in the middle of the road, their eyes glowing in the darkness. At their head was Amelia, her small frame silhouetted against the moonlight. She smiled a sad, haunting smile. "You can't run, Daddy," she said softly. "The children of the woods are everywhere. And the Wolf, he's coming for you." Gareth backed away, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the howling in the distance, growing louder, closer. This wasn't over. Not yet. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was already one of them. The transformation was inevitable. He just had to decide, fight it, or embrace it. The choice would be his. But the children would be waiting. And so would the Wolf. The moon hung high above the forest, casting its pale light over the road where Gareth stood, his breath fogging in the cold night air. The children watched him, their eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Amelia stood at the front, her smile no longer haunting but predatory. Behind them, the forest seemed to come alive, the trees swaying as if stirred by an unseen force. The howling grew louder, and Gareth knew without a doubt that the Wolf was close. He had moments left to decide. Asterisk run. Fight. Surrender. Asterisk his heart thundered in his chest. He couldn't outrun them. His blood was already tainted, the transformation too far along. He could feel it now, his skin itching, muscles twitching uncontrollably. The full moon was pulling at him, urging him to give in. But how could he fight them? They were just children twisted by the forest's curse, but still children. And Amelia. She was still his daughter, wasn't she? The howling reached a fever pitch, a guttural roar that rattled the very ground beneath his feet. From the shadows of the trees, the Wolf emerged massive, its fur black as the void, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The creature towered over the children, its teeth bared in a twisted snarl, saliva dripping from its long, pointed fangs. It was not merely a werewolf, it was something ancient, something from the deepest nightmares of man. The children stepped aside, parting like an eerie procession to let the beast through. It moved with purpose, stalking toward Gareth. Amelia watched silently, her eyes locked on her father. Gareth dropped to his knees. The choice had been taken from him. There was no escape, no salvation. The curse was too strong. He felt his body changing, his bones twisting and reshaping, his fingers elongating into claws, his senses sharpening as the moon's pull became irresistible. The pain was excruciating, yet through the agony, something darker, something primal awakened within him. He felt his humanity slipping away. The Wolf circled him, its massive paws crushing the earth beneath it. Gareth looked up, his vision blurring as the beast stopped inches from him, its hot breath on his face. You made me this," Gareth whispered, barely able to speak through the pain. The Wolf's glowing eyes narrowed as it regarded him, and then, in a voice like wine through dead leaves, it spoke. "You belong to the forest now." With a final, agonizing howl, Gareth's transformation completed. His body convulsed, bones snapping and reforming. His hands became clawed paws, fur sprouted from his skin, and his face elongated into a snout. He let out a blood-curdling roar that echoed through the forest. He was one of them now, no longer a man, but a creature of the woods, bound to the curse that had claimed him. The children surrounded him, their faces blank but expectant. Amelia stepped forward, her expression softening for just a moment as she looked at what her father had become. "You're with us now, Daddy," she whispered, reaching out to touch his fur. "We're all together. Forever." Gareth the Beast looked down at her, and for a fleeting moment, something human flickered in his mind. A memory of holding her as a baby, of watching her laugh in the sun. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by the pull of the forest and the call of the Wolf. The ancient werewolf watched, its eyes never leaving Gareth's. It nodded once, as if satisfied, before turning and disappearing back into the shadows. The children began to fade as well, one by one slipping back into the mist until only Amelia remained. She smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Let's go home." With no words left, no human thoughts remaining, Gareth, now a beast of the forest, followed his daughter into the woods. His steps were heavy but sure, his senses keen and sharp. The fog closed in around them, the trees swallowing them whole. And then they were gone, leaving the village behind, forgotten by time and devoured by the curse that had claimed them all. From that night forward, no one in Ashburn spoke of the children or the strange happenings in the woods. The fog never left, and the howls in the night became a constant presence. The villagers learned to ignore it, to carry on with their lives as if nothing had ever happened. But every full moon, the howls grew louder. Some said they could see figures moving in the mist, small shadows flitting through the trees, followed by something larger, something darker. The children of the woods were still out there, and now their father was with them. Ashburn was cursed, and the forest never let its own go. The end.